What's up, guys? I'm Sci-Hi, and I want to share kind of a prototype Esper Lotus control deck using two powerful new cards from Neon Dynasty. We're talking about Farewell and Kaito Shizuki. I'll cover Farewell first. This is a really interesting, versatile sweeper. Now, for whatever reason, when I played Magic as a young kid, I always gravitated towards cards like Wrath of God and Chroma's Vengeance. I just really found it so satisfying to watch your opponent build up a big, complicated board state full of wild, crazy cards, only to just cast one card and watch it all come crashing down. And if you like that sort of thing like I do, you probably have already fallen in love with this Farewell card. If you haven't yet, allow me to please try to persuade you to do so, because this card is pretty incredible and I don't feel like it's gotten the recognition that it deserves. Certainly the power creep is real and cards become more powerful and get less of the spotlight because they're just overshadowed or by just more powerful things. But Farewell is pretty incredible in that this is one of the most versatile sweepers, kind of catch-all cards we've seen printed in a while, frankly. The ability for 6 mana sorcery to choose one or more of exiled artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or graveyards is incredibly flexible. Just in that being able to exile things is huge. It means you don't have to deal with effects that are making things indestructible or coming back from the graveyard, but not only that, this can exile all graveyards. So Farewell is really kind of just like a wild card for control to just kind of deal with virtually anything. And it's interesting that it can even hit graveyards. So really the only thing that Farewell can't hit are planeswalkers and, of course, cards in your opponent's hand. But as we look at this deck and how it's built, we'll see that we have definitely have plans to deal with those zones as well. Speaking of your opponent's hand and killing opposing planeswalkers. But Farewell is just ultra powerful card. We're going to take a look at this Esper Lotus shell. We've seen a lot of Azorius Lotus builds, but haven't been a lot of Esper builds really taking hold in the format. And I would like to present this as a prototype to try to get there. So we'll look at all the cards, especially we'll take a look at Kaito Shizuki, but we'll start from the bottom up. Of course, this being a Lotus deck, we're taking advantage of Lotus Field, which of course can tap to make 3 mana, but we're going to exploit it, and without having to sacrifice lands, we're going to get into play more easily, using, of course, the trick with Discontinuity, where you cast or you play the Lotus, and in response to its trigger, you end the turn. Therefore, then you don't have to pay the cost, and you get a free Lotus Field into play without having to sacrifice 2 lands. And of course, the most popular way to cheat it into play is with Strict Proctor, the 1/3 flyer that says whenever a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter that ability unless its controller pays 2. So naturally, we just decline that. In addition to Strict Proctor, of course, enabling Lotus Field, it's also just really good in the format for just canceling out a lot of other decks incidentally. This just will make ETB, enter the battlefield effects, that much more difficult for your opponent to leverage and use. So strong card for sure that's been really picking up in popularity in Historic. We've also have 1 copy of Search for Azcanta, which of course is just a bomb in control. I'm not going to cover all these cards at length. Definitely can check out one of my previous videos where we talk about Azorius Lotus Field. We go into detail about each individual card, but most notably for this video, we want to talk about the new Kamigawa cards and what impact they may have on existing decks. So lately, I've been focusing on this really interesting planeswalker, Kaito Shizuki. I know this has been, kind of experimented with and starting to show up in Standard more, but I don't feel like this has really showed up in Historic a ton yet. And to me, it's one of the most intriguing cards from the set, what I've seen. So what is he? He's a 3 mana, 3 loyalty. It's a very unique ability that at the beginning of your end step, if Kaito Shizuki entered the battlefield this turn, he phases out. So like a good ninja, he protects himself, kind of hides into the shadows the turn at the end step after the turn you played him. And they seem kind of harmless, not that powerful, but it actually is really handy. This means that you just don't have to fear for his death the first turn you play him, and you're almost always going to get at least two activations with it before your opponent has a chance to try to kill it, at least with creatures. So what does he do though? What are the abilities? Well, the +1, of course, is draw a card, then discard a card unless you attack this turn. -2, he can create a 1/1 blue ninja creature token with this creature can't be blocked. And then his ultimate, you get an emblem that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a blue or black creature card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Now, admittedly, his ultimate we're not really looking to do in this deck. We're just using this as another very cheap 3 mana planeswalker to draw a lot of cards. Now, a lot of times we will draw and discard. That's fine, it's just more card selection, but there are certainly times where we can use its minus ability and get unblockable ninjas into play, and then that just means that this is just drawing cards without even having to discard them. Now, a 3 mana planeswalker that can continually draw cards as well as make creatures is pretty powerful in my book. If you look at other 3 mana planeswalkers, there's really not a lot that just continually can draw cards as an engine like this. Obviously, we've got the all-star Narset here as well, but this is, a throwaway planeswalker where there's no way to uptick it, so you're only going to get 2 activations at most. Still a bomb card for sure, and it's in this deck to thwart other control decks as well as non-control decks like auras. Just the clause of making it so that they can't draw additional cards each turn is huge. I mean, this cripples auras. It's something that auras has to deal with because they can't pop off and start drawing their cards. It also is very crippling towards opposing control decks. Now, this deck is configured to be kind of like a best for one to just absolutely shit on aggro decks with the mass amount of removal we have, as well as just the snowball effects of all these planeswalkers to draw cards and totally take control of the game. But returning back to Kaito Shizuki, again, for a 3 mana planeswalker that can continue drawing cards is very powerful. And once we have this trifecta of planeswalkers, things snowball out of control quickly. Of course, we've got 4 Teferi Hero of Dominaria as well, which I've talked ad nauseum on various other videos and control decks that use Teferi. Maybe the best planeswalker in Historic, in my opinion. He just does so much. Now, once you get his ultimate online, as well as having Narset in play and Kaito Shizuki, it's like reaching absolute transcendence. Like, it just feels like God mode when you've got so much interaction going on between these planeswalkers. Now, we mentioned configuring this deck to be good against control and aggro, so we'll continue in that theme. We've also got this new all-star from Alchemy that's maybe just one of the most cancerous, back-breaking cards to play against for kind of low-to-the-ground aggro decks. Divine Purge. Exile all artifacts and creatures with mana value 3 or less. They perpetually become more expensive to cast by 2 colorless, and your opponents can recast them. But it's absolutely back-breaking, buys you incredible amount of time to just erase the whole board. And this has application even against non-low-to-the-ground aggro decks. Maybe you're up against like a kind of Urzatron historic toolbox deck that's looking to cast Ulamog and Ugin. Well, this just wrecks all of their artifacts in play, at least their 2 casting cost artifacts, like Mind Stone, etc. You're just going to wipe all that off the board. So this card just buys you time. It is notable that your opponent can start to cast them back, so you will be in situations where maybe you clear the whole board, maybe you're up against Merfolk or something. They can slowly start bringing them back, but the idea is that it becomes so backbreaking for them that they just can't And with the repeated Wrath of Gods and value that you're going to start to generate as you land these Planeswalkers, a comeback just becomes out of the question for an aggro deck after all of these back-breaking effects. So we've got 2 Divine Purges and 4 Wrath of Gods, 4 Teferis. We already talked about the Farewells, and then the Discontinuities are awesome. Not only just for enabling the Lotus Fields, but Discontinuity is just a back-breaking time walk effect, essentially. When you cast this for 6 mana, oftentimes what you may be looking to do against your opponent is cast this during their upkeep. So you put a stop on their upkeep and cast this, and it just immediately ends the turn, assuming they can't counter it. They don't get to attack. They don't even draw a card. They can't play anything. That's just effectively a time walk, except for that your opponent has gotten to untap. Now, there are situations also where you may have more knowledge of the game and the game state. Maybe you're expecting your opponent to cast a card, and you can also just cast Discontinuity to essentially end the turn that way and counter that spell. And just not have it resolve. So Discontinuity is really powerful, and taking extra turn effects is even more powerful when you're getting more value on your turn, whether that's by drawing more cards or creating tokens, but most often it's going to be just getting more value from drawing cards. So when you take an extra turn, when you've got Kaito and Teferi, maybe search for Azcanta online, that's just more turns for you to find more value and continue drawing cards. Just bury your opponent in resources and win the war that way. Now, the last card is kind of a pet card of mine, but now that we're talking about an Esper Lotus Control deck, we can bring in this interesting card, Thought Distortion. 6 mana, hefty cost, but again, we're cheating mana into play, so we can cast this as early as turn 4. If we maybe use Stifle, we could even do this faster by getting Lotus Field online quicker. But nevertheless, Thought Distortion is a really interesting card to kind of just win a war against an opposing control deck. I mean, how often are you playing control mirror matches where it is just the most boring match in the world, where each player is just saying draw, go, everyone is holding on to a bunch of counter spells and just countering each other's effects, playing things at end step, maybe cycling to make shark tokens. Thought Distortion just kind of breaks this mirror match. When you draw this card, if your opponent's just saying draw, go the whole time, you cast this, you can absolutely just vaporize their hand. But not only against other control decks, against those Urzatron, like Karn, Ulamog, Ugin decks, this can be backbreaking for them as well. In that, if you get to 6 mana, sooner than they can land a bomb, which you should be able to with your Lotus Fields, you can cast this and just absolutely cripple their hand and exile everything, non-creature, non-land cards from their hand. But it also exiles them from the graveyard, which is notable as well. So Thought Distortion is a really interesting card. And again, I should stress this is kind of a best of one stock list. If we were building this with a sideboard for best of 3, we would certainly probably make some tweaks. We might shave down the amount of farewells, shave down the Thought Distortions, run them in the sideboard as something to bring in once we know they're going to be better. And then if we were playing best of 3, to replace these, there's many things we could think about, but you might want to just go with just a kind of a stock, strong, proven card like Shark Typhoon. Because as you can see here, despite having all these oppressive controlling cards and board sweepers, we don't have a lot of just proactive immediate win cards. We kind of get our opponent to tap out with resolving an ultimate from Teferi, or chipping away with Blue Ninja creature tokens, which we're probably not really going to win the game with those. These can be useful though for pressuring opponents' planeswalkers for sure. And again, with Kaito, there's no good way your opponent can really deal with this in a good deal for them. Planeswalkers like Narset and Kaito, immediately when they resolve, you get an activation from them. So that means you're drawing a card or you're creating a token, And but the thing that drew that is still behind, of course. The Planeswalker, Kaito, or Narset, they're still behind. And your opponent still has to find a way to deal with that. So they can't really economically deal with that, because even if they just have a spot removal to kill it, well, you still either drew a card or left a token behind. So these are just really good value Planeswalkers that create problems for your opponent that they have to deal with. And at 3 mana, they're coming into play fast. And again, they're immune to all of our sweepers. With Farewell, we can hit everything. These Enchantress decks can just get wrecked by this card. You want to cast 9 lives? Okay, I'll just exile all enchantments and kill you that way. Farewell is just, it's really backbreaking for a lot of decks, and just a really interesting card. But like I was saying, if you're going best of 3, certainly can shave down some of these things and tweak the deck to be kind of more all-purpose for game 1, and have some of these other cards in the sideboard like Thought Distortion and Farewell when you know they're going to be better. Against another control deck, you might want to be running less Farewells or none at all, and you would want something rather like a Shark Typhoon, so you can cycle it, get Shark tokens, and just pressure your opponent that way. But that's the deck in a nutshell. Esper Control has always been a solid control deck throughout Magic's history, not just in even Historic, but in Modern and other formats, because you've got the power of blue. You can position your deck with counter spells. It's another thing you could run in the sideboard. Obviously, white is the best controlling nature for board sweeping, gain life if you need it. Blue for counter spells and control. But black adds an interesting dimension to these control decks, in that now you can attack your opponent's hands rather than run a ton of counter spells and be very reactive. We can be a lot more proactive, get a lot of mana early, and just land these haymakers, whether they're time walk effects or effects that cripple non-aggro decks if they're cast early, and just strip their hand of everything. And again, this card can't be countered, so most of the time it's going to resolve unless they have a specialized card to return a spell to your hand or something stupid like that. But Thought Distortion is a very interesting card to just kind of destroy opposing control decks. But that's the deck in a nutshell. The lands, again, obviously we got the Lotus Field, smattering of all the best Esper type lands, and then we are rocking 3 Hall of Storm Giants, which is, again, this is another way you can win, of course. It's easy to bring this online when we've got Lotus Fields and access to tons of mana. It's one of the best creature lands ever printed, in that it has ward and it's just so powerful at 7/7. Hefty cost to activate for sure, but again, when we're using Lotus Field, that's not that big of a deal. We can get to 6 mana no problem. So we've got a full 3 copies here. Again, they come into play untapped, so you want to pay attention to what lands you're playing so that you can try to turn to Search for Azcanta or turn to Strict Proctor. But that's the deck. Again, Hall of Storm Giants is a great card here just to win games when you just need to win. You need to find something to win. You've got so many controlling cards, but sometimes you're not able to ultimate with Teferi, and you just need a big-ass 7/7 blue giant to get you there. So that's the deck. Appreciate you guys watching to the end. Again, I'm Sci-Hi. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned. I'll have upcoming videos featuring Kaito Shizuki. I've got a few more decks using this new powerful Planeswalker, and I will share a video where I think I have found quite possibly the best home for him in Historic. I've been rocking this guy for several games now and having a lot of success. So looking forward to sharing some more deck lists using this guy with you. But until then, good luck on the ladder, guys, and peace.